everyone, good day, and welcome to another new episode of the Baseline to Baseline podcast. My name is Alister, host of the show, and I'm really excited to mention that we have an outstanding guest joining us today, who is Mr. Kevin Routledge, the director of the British Basketball League here in the UK, and also the director of the Morningside Arena in Leicester. He is also the chairman of the Leicester Riders, who are the home team at the Morningside Arena in Leicester. So I'm really excited that he was able to take some time out of his schedule to speak some basketball with us, talk about the British Basketball League, a little bit about the Leicester Riders, NBA basketball, the state of British basketball as a whole in general, and, just, cut it up and have a really good, fun, light conversation with Kevin here today. So Kevin, I'd like to welcome you this morning to this interview, and we'll just get right into it.
Pleased to be with you, Alister.
Excellent. So I've sent you a couple of questions. The first one, basically, just get to know a little more about you. You've had a long career and connection to British basketball, and how did you get into the sport here in the UK?
So I was born in Canada, lived on Long Island in New York in my teenage years, then moved to Ireland. While I was I played basketball on Long Island, obviously. But then when I moved to Ireland and went to Trinity College, Dublin, I played basketball a lot. We used to tour. We played in the National League. It was quite, we were really into it. So then when I came to the UK after university in 1973, I joined up with the then Loughborough All-Stars early in 1974. And I've been involved with them ever since in one way or another.
Okay, excellent. So you say you played basketball. How tall are you? What's your position?
So I'm just 6'3" and a half.
Okay, so you played guard, or did they use you as a center?
No. I was kind of like a forward, more a forward.
Okay.
In those days, 6'3" was kind of tall. It's not really very tall anymore.
Yeah, and I think that kind of holds true in a lot of these places where basketball is not really the main sport. Once you're tall, you go under the rim.
Absolutely.
That's cool. Now, one of the reasons why we brought you on today was to talk about, of course, your involvement in British basketball and everything. And how I came across your name was based on an ESPN article that I saw, speaking about some of the challenges and maybe some of the stagnancy that British basketball has had over time. And it's a bit weird for me because Britain is a place that is really rich in sporting culture. Yes, football, cricket, rugby, etc. And it's fair to say that basketball, of course, is not a British sport. It was invented in the US, etc. But, it's really weird that basketball hasn't caught on. Could you tell me a bit of the challenges you faced where basketball here is concerned?
Yeah, Alister, you make a really good point because, in fact, basketball came to the UK in the late 1890s. It was brought over by the YMCA. So it's not like it's not been around for a long time. Excellent. The other strange thing about it is if you talk to the government, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, they do a survey every year. And amongst 11 to 15-year-olds in the UK, it's the second most played sport. So it's only after football.
Excellent.
Just under a third of all boys and girls play basketball between 11 and 15.
Right.
That's more than cycle, more than run athletics, and way more than play rugby or cricket. Only football, where just over half of all boys and girls is it. So the question then becomes, well, if all these kids are playing it when they're young, why isn't it a bigger sport there? And when you then start to look at some of the other bigger issues. And so one of it is the UK, as you say, has a tradition in sports like football, cricket, and rugby. In fact, they invented those sports, arguably, certainly at a high level. But there is no tradition of indoor sports in the UK.
Right.
Partly that's a weather thing. Partly it's because of the traditional sports. But it doesn't have the indoor facilities that you get in the US and or much of Europe. So you go anywhere in France or Spain, Italy, they have a 2,000 or 3,000 indoor facility where they play basketball, and if it's Southern Europe, they play volleyball. If it's Northern Europe, they play handball. Gotcha. There isn't that tradition in the UK. The other thing is that it's more a political thing. So the government comes mainly from public schools, doesn't matter what the party is, and basketball isn't played at public schools. Whereas cricket, rugby, not so much football, but the football was the sport of the working, the masses, if you like. So every other sport finds it difficult. Then if you bring it forward more laterally, there's been some false dawns for basketball at a higher level. And again, what's fundamentally held it back most of all is there's a lack of infrastructure. So first of all, there is a lack of facilities. So if you're a young lad or girl coming out of school, you played basketball, you've left school, you want to go somewhere and play with your mates, where can you go? Leisure centres have generally been in decline in the UK. They're all losing money. They've been outsourced by councils to third parties generally, not in Leicester, but in most parts of the country. There's third party. And what they have to do is try and make money. And basketball uses up a decent amount of space for a small number of players, so it's not a cost-effective sport to play at the participation level indoors. Plus, prices have been rising because they all lose money. And in fact, even though the government allowed, just for example, indoor leisure centers and sports centers to open post-COVID, more than a third of them still not open because they can't make any money. Because the restrictions indoors are much greater than outdoors, so it's simply not cost effective. And then you've got heating and lighting bills and everything else on top of it. So there are those structural issues, which I talk about. And then at the very top level, mistakes have been made. There was a rush of football money into basketball in the late 80s. Man United had a team. Portsmouth Football Club had a team. Later on, Newcastle at the end of the 1990s had a team. A large influx of money, but they lost money and then they exited. You're seeing that more laterally in rugby, huge amounts of money going into the professional game, but everybody's losing money. So the question is, bar one or two clubs, the question is, how long will people be prepared to continue to pump money in? Now you see it in football, but of course at the top level of football, they're now making money. So the top clubs make huge amounts of money. Everybody in the championship football loses money, but they're prepared to lose money because they might get into the Premier League and make a load of money. So there's that incentive that drags everybody up. So a long, complicated story, but also the sport has made mistakes along the way. I'm talking about the senior people in the sport have not invested in the right places, have not invested in infrastructure, particularly, has not invested in venues. And that's one of the things we have done more laterally. We opened our arena, as you know, in January 2016. A couple of years later, Newcastle have opened their arena. Sheffield is in the final stages of they've got planning permission. They're just getting the numbers together so they can finance it. Bristol have announced their plans for a 4,500 seat arena. They're part of the Bristol Sport, and I expect Plymouth and some other clubs to not be very far behind that.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's like you say, it's a very complicated story. There's a lot of things going on in terms of funding, etc. But the one thing from the start of your response that really surprised me was that there's still such a large number of kids playing basketball. It's second only to football, and it kind of perplexes me because yes, it's true there are not much infrastructure in place. Loads of indoor courts, leisure facilities are kind of going down. But I noticed local governments have kind of put in place, I suppose, in different areas, a lot of multi-use gaming areas outdoor. So there's a lot of basketball courts out there and everything. But usually when I drive around, it's usually empty or guys playing football on it rather than playing basketball, etc. But it's really interesting to hear that it's still the second most popular sport amongst younger kids. But one of the things I want to kind of get to based on that response was football. We know football is the overwhelming favorite sport in the world and here in the UK for sure. And one of the things that I read in one of the articles was that, football academies, they kind of monopolize the youth. They bring them in, you have a little bit of talent and you're locked in until like 17, 18 years old. And, it's kind of missing the prime opportunity to learn basketball. What's your take on that?
So I wanted to say one other thing, though, a point I didn't make on that, which is really important as well, is who plays basketball. Now, I said to you, there are large numbers of people, but amongst the surveyed people,
Mhm.
it's the only sport where more than half are black minority ethnic. It's the only sport. So cricket is 1/3 because quite a few Asian ethnicity play cricket, obviously.
Yes.
But you have other sports like rugby where it's almost all white, both codes of rugby. The other thing about the people who play basketball, they're in the inner cities, predominantly in the bigger inner cities.
Yes.
Those are people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And you say about councils have done things, and they have built some outside courts, but actually there has been no money in councils for years, certainly since the crash in 2008, and actually before then.
Yeah.
So their ability as local councils to invest, you will see some flagship developments, is limited.
Yes.
And then the final point I'd make about outdoor is you're right, but you cannot play outdoor on a wet surface. You can't play basketball. It's just far too dangerous.
Yes.
So yes, in Leicester, the outdoor courts, well, not in Leicester because of the lockdown, but in other periods before coronavirus, there was a lot of people on the outdoor courts playing basketball. But again, we have unpredictable weather. So that factors into it as well.
Yeah.
But basically it comes back to lack of investment.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's at the root of it. And it is. And of the, when you look at the constituency of people that it caters to, they don't really have much of a voice.
Right.
Their ability to affect the political process and to make sure that the right sort of investments take place it is very limited. So I do want to just round that out because it is part of a bigger picture. And of course, you've seen some of those bigger issues come up with the Black Lives Matters project,
and we're going to take that
and so on. So that provides the sort of rounded situation without wishing to make excuses, because I did say as well, people in the sport could have done better at critical times during the development. Oh, something came flying in front of me. I don't know where that came from. Somebody threw me a letter.
It's not going to prevent us from talking basketball. No matter what it is, basketball will continue. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, I think that's good, and I think there were a couple of things that I was going to touch on that was really interesting there as well, because I have down on my little prep sheet. I'm wondering, is there a little bit of a, I'm not sure if it's the right thing to say, but it's topical at this moment. A little bit of racial bias going on. Is the investment not being funneled into areas where it would be perceived that there's some sort of racial bias? Like you mentioned, it's inner cities, and black kids mainly playing basketball. And, is there something to do with that? And, maybe this is not the right forum to discuss that, but, it begs one of those questions. Why is it that the sport where the most ethnic minorities play is not getting, is as much investment as it should?
Well, let me put it a different way to you, Alister. One of the arguments that we're making to government, and we have sporadic discussions with them, is to turn it on its head. Right. And what we can say is basketball can be the conduit to addressing a lot of the society's problems, whether they're in the inner city and so on. Definitely. Whether it's the employability, whether it's education, whether it's knife crime, whether it's antisocial behavior. Basketball really is the easy sport to play, really easy sport to play. Yep. But it can be a conduit, and there are lots of examples of that going on up and down the country. A lot of the clubs now have foundations, charities that are doing the work, even outside the BBL. There are other clubs like Lewisham in London who are doing excellent work, like the NASA in Hackney. Newham, sorry. Yep. So there's a lot of good activity. So it's more about persuading the politicians that basketball could be a very effective conduit that can bring a lot of bang for the buck, so to speak, in terms of addressing these issues. We all know the issues are there. Yeah. So I don't want to, it's for others to judge about racial bias. It would be not appropriate for me to make those kinds of
understand. But I absolutely.
But as a positive factor, I think it's underutilized. And that is an argument we as basketball need to make more powerfully.
I agree with that. And, I like sending that message. Let's flip it on its head and make it a positive. Can we use the sport as a conduit towards, bringing races together and everything? And I know in Newham, because I lived in the Stratford area for a little while, and I was involved in some of their practices and everything. And the lady, I can't remember who runs the team anymore. Natasha, right. She she's done a really good job. And they set up this program called Carry a Ball, Not a Blade, or something.
Yes, that's correct.
Help to, reduce knife crime and get kids into the gym to play basketball and learn. And, these are the sorts of initiatives that could bring things together and bring a positive light towards Black and ethnic minority groups. I think that's really good. And I think there's also one more thing. It's just a wider cultural or social problem with how people perceive basketball. Because I remember, and I know I had this conversation with you when we spoke last week, one of the BBC presenters, when I know David Stern came over to the UK to present one of the London games. I think it was Detroit and some other team and the Raptors, I think. This sportscaster interviewed David Stern, and he had a very combative tone with him. Why do you want to bring your sport over here? And it was, David Stern was really big on globalization and probably wanting to establish a team over here in the UK. And he was just, fighting it down. Why do you want to bring your sport over here? And I left that interview thinking, well, this is why basketball is not getting anywhere, because there's just this wider sense of it's their sport, and also, basketball, it came across really badly, and it's just one of those things that stuck with me. But we'll move on to the next question. I think that was a really good conversation on that, and lots of sound bites in there I will use to kind of drive the point.
Well, Alister, I want to just pick up something about David Stern, because I met David Stern several times.
Excellent.
In fact, I met him in that very game you were talking about, because it went to, from memory, it went to 4 overtimes that game.
I was there, I remember.
I was a Raptors fan, and I was going, will I ever get home tonight? Will I ever get home tonight?
I remember.
They went to 4 periods of overtime.
Yes.
But David Stern, you talked about it, he always said to me, Kevin, the key thing you must do, because we had the same conversation we're having now. What are the issues? Why in the UK? Because what has happened is there's been phenomenal growth of basketball globally. Yes. There's now the most people who play basketball are in China. 300 million basketball players in China.
Yes.
It's the number 2 sport in the world to football. There are professional leagues on every continent, in every country. So really that interviewer is interviewing David Stern. They're showing their ignorance, that they don't realize how huge a sport it is globally. So the question is, more should have been turned around, is why is the UK an exception? What are the barriers? And there are barriers, because every sport likes to protect its domain.
Yes.
And you asked me earlier about the question about football sucking up all the talent. Actually, it's rugby is more of a challenge for basketball, because they're the bigger guys.
Right.
They're paying more money, so it becomes more attractive for British youth. But I think that whole issue of yet another barrier, if you like, there is another barrier there that was displayed in that interview. And I always found that David Stern was a very careful man, but a very smart man. Obviously, he took the NBA to great heights until he recently died. But within that, there's a whole series of other stories.
Definitely. And he was really graceful in his response, because I was like, he could have gone at the guy and kind of really told him the facts about it, but he kind of just let it slide, because he wanted I suppose, a non-confrontational interview. But it was just something that stuck with me. So thanks for your response on that. So what I'll move on to next question basically is, of course, we talk about the British Basketball League, and just British basketball in general. It's ranked number 42 in the FIBA rankings at the moment. And we've had great players pass through the ranks. You have Luol Deng, John Amici, Pops Mensah Bonsu, Joel Freeland, and currently right now OG Anunoby, who plays for the Raptors as well. So we it's not that the UK cannot produce talent. It's there. It just needs maybe some more coaching, leadership, and everything to kind of develop that talent. What do you think about the current British talent? Is there anyone in that pro pipeline potentially from maybe Leicester or elsewhere? And what is the state of, just talent generally in the UK?
Yeah, I think, again, this goes to the globalization of the sport.
Yes.
And years ago, you could get away with raw talent would take you to the top.
Yes.
That's no longer the case, because throughout Europe, throughout the US, even into Africa now and in the Far East, there is a huge industry searching for the best talent. And you get talent, raw talent, and you apply coaching to it to then create the potential of the players.
Gotcha.
And we used to be, our coaching was good enough to be able to create the, before any of those players you mentioned, the first British player, Steve Buck, who's still Wisham Club, and he works for the governing body. He was an LA. Steve Bucknell. He's from South London.
Okay.
And he ended up at the Lakers.
Right. Okay.
So he was the first one. So he was a fabulous raw talent who then got developed and so on. But now the Steve Bucknells of the next generation, and with them there are more than 100 British players in US universities as we speak, all aspiring to be the next. And there's some great British players, Miles Heston playing in France at the moment, Ovi Soko, who is at London Lions last year, some great British talent. But the competition is fierce. And I believe that our coaching at the junior level hasn't kept up. And if there's one area where we really, if we want to create, I think the talent is there, but it doesn't get developed in the right way.
Gotcha.
I can't remember the last time I saw a great British shooter, a guy who could knock down the three reliably, relentlessly. Yet I see lots of Spanish, Greek, etc. And again, shooting isn't that difficult. You need to have very, very good technique. You need to have it drilled into you, and then you need to practice like crazy. So that means good coaching at a very, very good age, a mindset to want to be the best, and then access to facilities so you can take your 5,000, 10,000 shots a day. Because if you don't do it, that kid in Germany is doing it, that kid in France is doing it, that kid in Spain is doing it. So the raw talent, I just don't think is enough anymore. So we've got the talent, the talented players. Some of them are going into rugby. You look at a couple of the, Itoji, who plays for Saracens in England, at rugby and plays for England. He looks like he could have been a very good basketball player. He has that athleticism, the moves, and so on. But he's gone to rugby because that's where the money is. So it's the combination. I'm back to making it complicated again. I don't mean to, but it isn't just about raw talent, because there's so much talent around the world, and they're finding it. There are scouts. There are scouts in the UK from big, like Real Madrid and Italian basketball clubs looking at it. You've got coaches from US colleges looking at the talent, trying to draw it through. But they're also all across Africa looking for the next Luol Deng, the next Joel Embiid, so the competition levels has just skyrocketed. And therefore, what we need to do in the UK, if we want to compete, has stepped up another bar. But coaching at a young age is critical in every sport. And then therefore you've seen how in football they've created the National Academy, which is mimicking what the French did. Because the French, suddenly we're developing lots of very talented football players. How did they do that? They had a very structured National Academy structure to go and find talent at the ages of 5, 6, 7, because in football, they're already, you can see the difference in players at a very, very young age. Not so much basketball. You have more time to develop, and it's much more about physical. So you get in basketball, the kid who's, 6'1" at 14, and then by 17 he's 6'7", and like the Greek Freak. He came on very late through it, and he was an immigrant in Athens. So those players are around. but we've got to do a lot more. And I'm back to infrastructure, and I count in that coaching as well.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that's all really good points raised there. And I think it's things, we definitely need to look at a lot closer with leadership and coaching and everything, etc. So I think that's really good. One of the things I want to bring up, I was thinking about it this morning, and it came up, and I remember 2011, the NBA was about to head into a lockdown, and one of the star players was considering coming over to the British Basketball League, Ron Artest, also known as Meta World Peace. So when he announced that at the time, I think a lot of players were trying to consider their options, going to China, going to Spain, etc. And when Ron Artest said he was coming to England to play for I think it's the Cheshire.
Yeah.
I was completely surprised by it, and I have two quotes here where it says that it was a bit disappointing because I think they were trying to highlight how bad the league was in comparison to other leagues. So it was, it's so bad that Jets director Pete Hawkins agreed that with Ron Artest's agent at the time, David Bowman, who claimed that the British Basketball League was 10th or 12th best league in Europe. That's courtesy from SB Nation. And the next quote was Ron Artest. He acknowledged that the teams in the British Basketball League aren't too good, but his decision can be considered a seismic shift in the mentality of Lakers players at that time, preparing to go off into overseas markets to continue play because they wanted to continue play. And I think that's kind of one of the problems that there was. But I could imagine at that time it must have been really exciting for you guys and other teams to think of Ron Artest battling with British players, etc. What do you remember? What do you remember about that time?
I knew Peter Hawkins extremely well. I was working closely with him on other matters.
Yes.
And it was a unique situation. Of course, Ron Artest himself is a very unique player, a very unusual player. I think he would have found he would not have been able to dominate the league. So there's the perception that it is what it is. It is a mid-ranking league at best in Europe. It's just a matter of fact, because the money is there in the bigger European leagues by factors. So you can't argue. You can try and argue. We have some very good quality players in this league. That's true. But I think a player like Ron would have been very good, but he wouldn't have dominated. In other words, his team wouldn't have won every game just because they had Artest.
Yeah.
We've seen that before in the past when very high quality players came in. Ovi Soko came in. He's a very, very good player. He didn't dominate the league.
Right.
And he played well, but other teams could contain him. And that's because there's a lot of talented players around, and the guys who make the very upper echelon, and in Europe, Ovi's right up there. They are better, but they're not massively better. Okay. They are a bit better. If you want to go to the guys who would dominate, then you go to the top NBA guys. Yes, they would come into this league, and who would stop LeBron in the British league? Nobody. Actually, in most European leagues, who would stop LeBron?
Exactly.
Many NBA teams would stop LeBron. Mm-hmm. So there is that factor as well. It was an interesting time, but it wasn't the first, because we had Dennis Rodman play in the BBL.
Yes, I remember that vaguely. Yes.
Yeah, so he came over for one of the I'm a Celebrity TV shows.
Yeah,
Brighton hired him, and you know who in Brighton hired him, Dennis Rodman, to play?
No, who's that?
The current world champion Toronto Raptors head coach, Nick Nurse.
Yes, right.
So Nick Nurse was the general manager, head coach of the Bears, and he got on to Rodman's agent and said, he's over here, why doesn't he play in the BBL?
Nice,
and guess what? He didn't dominate either. But then again, he was a little bit out of shape.
Way past his prime. Yeah, exactly. But no,
he was done more as a to sell tickets rather than to win games.
But yeah, I could imagine, because at that time, I'm not British, but I'm here and I'm listening to Ron Artest over here, and I know that would have been really exciting for everyone at that time.
Yeah, it would have been.
So that's
really. He would have certainly increased the publicity
Definitely. which is part of what the
which is part of it, absolutely,
to get sponsorship and to get money flowing in. So that would have been really good. So I'd just like to end this segment here really quickly. Just going to do a quick little promo. Entertainers gravitate towards entertainers, so why not check out a website that is made for entertainers by entertainers? Visit the Artest Post for interviews with professional performers like dancers, actors, film directors, and even an international supermodel. Visit the Artest Post or visit the social media pages at the Artest Post on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.